Hey, what is up, everybody? It is Dr. Vibe here, the host of the Dr. Vibe Show, and also the host of monthly Google Hangouts at the Good Men Project, which is one of the most viewed websites for men in the world, averaging around 2.5 to 3 million page views a week. And you are blessed and highly favored, a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. We are fired up because we have Wendy Knight-Agard back again. Yes, she's a three-timer. In what, 3 weeks? That must be a record. I think I'm gonna have to check on my show on my end, but she is back again to share with us. She is of What's Eating You fame, and she's coming back to really interesting. I like the topic. She the way she titled it tonight was money, very much money about, self-sabotage. I don't like that. That sounds so tragic and so intense, but it's how to use your self-sabotage to help you lose weight. So Wendy's going to share with us a bit tonight. Wendy, what is up?
I am great. What is up with you, Dr. Vibe?
Everything's up. I'm blessed.
Uh-oh, looks like I've lost sound.
Favorite. I'm a magnet for miracle, solution for someone's problem, so I'm all good in regards to hearing tonight, and I may have a conversation piece in between what you're sharing with us. How's things been since we last chatted about a week ago? Good, good. Any more success stories? Because I know the last time you were on air with us, you had shared how you were going to... Okay, so we've lost Wendy for a bit audio-wise. Wendy, are you there? Okay. Oh.
I'm here now, but I'm also losing you a little bit audio-wise. The sound is going in and out.
Okay, so we're back. So yeah, let's speak of that with just a little bit of a hiccup. What's been going on since you last shared with us? Because I know that during our last conversation, at the end you said you were invited to speak at a conference. Any more big successes since then?
Just going along, having a great week, helping people with whatever's going on in their emotional state. I should mention that I'm going to be on the Twitter chat this Friday night at 10 p.m. with Marie Roper-Jones at Raising Great Men.
The hashtag for that is Mums of Boys Chat. So that's MOMSOFBOYSCHAT. And yes, I'll be there because I'm there going to be supporting Wendy, making sure she walks good, Twitter-wise, during the conversation. So we're really excited about that. I'm very happy that Marie has made the opportunity for you to take part in a great Twitter chat. So that's good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So other than that, it's just been a great week of doing the same thing, helping people with their emotions and their consciousness.
Okay, so what was the reason for the title for our conversation tonight? How to use your self-sabotage. Like, people will go, self-sabotage, like that sounds tragic. To help yourself lose weight. Why did you come up with that? How did you come up with that title?
Well, because as I work with people on helping them process their emotions and deal with things that are going on in their state of mind, what I realize is that there's often these ironic solutions, things that seem ironic to the intellectual mind, because we judge certain emotions as bad, we judge certain experiences as bad. Self-sabotage is the one thing that I think we've all experienced. I've heard so many of my clients say to me, Wendy, I do fine, I go to the gym for a week, I eat well, and then the weekend comes and I sabotage myself. I've heard that so many times, and so we've all come to hate our self-sabotage, haven't we?
Very true. So they're that open with you, saying they're self-sabotaging themselves?
Well, that's it. I mean, that's the thing. That's the language that people use when they're talking to me about it. They'll say, I sabotage myself. They'll say, I know how to eat well, I know what to do, but I sabotage myself. And this is a pattern that I've heard many, many times. And it's not even only as it relates to eating. It could be anything that they're working on. It could be their exercise routine. It could be anything that they're trying to move forward with, even in their business. Oh, I sabotage myself because, I was managing my time really well, and then, I blew it. I sabotaged myself. I hear that phrase over and over and over with my coaching clients. So that led me to think of the title of something to discuss, this idea of self-sabotage, which everyone seems to struggle with so much. So then I thought more about it, and I thought, well, how can we use that self-sabotage? If it's happening anyway, and we've all experienced it. I know I've experienced it. Mine with eating used to be typically the weekends. You know, I'd eat well during the week, and then I'd, Friday night, have a little junk as a reward of sorts, and then sort of sabotage myself for the rest of the weekend. It's kind of like, oh, I've fallen off the wagon now, so let's just keep going. And then by the end of the weekend, I'd feel like I'd sabotaged my own plan. Can you relate to that at all?
I certainly can. Been there, done that, got my T-shirt, so to speak, on that kind of experience.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, so what are some of the causes that your clients say make them self-sabotage themselves when it comes to eating?
Well, this is the tough thing, is that they don't normally know what causes the self-sabotage. They really don't, and this is why people are so frustrated. They don't come to me and say, well, I sabotage myself because of X, Y, Z. They say, I just self-sabotage myself. I don't know why. And this is why we need to talk about it. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how we can use that self-sabotage to get some insight as to what is going on with us emotionally. Once we have that insight, just like we talked about last week, we can resolve it. We can process the emotions, and what we'll see is if we do that is less and less self-sabotage. So one of the things that I wanted to start with...
Excellent.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry,
Oh, okay.
my bad. Go ahead.
No problem, no problem. One of the things that I wanted to start with was explaining the idea that the problem isn't really the problem. So people come and they say, I self-sabotage myself. This is a problem. My answer to that is, that's not really the problem. The problem is our perception of the problem, our perception of the situation and defining it as a problem. Now, where does this come from? Why do we immediately say that anything that we don't like is a problem? Well, this is our false ego talking. And this is the first point I want to explain to everyone tonight, is to help everyone understand that we're really split. And we could look at the way as human beings we're split in many different ways. But one of the ways that we're split is between our true self on one hand and our false ego on the other. And we all have this, there's no exceptions, it's just the way it is, right? Our true self is the being that walks the earth, observing and knowing and feeling and living and all of these things without any assessment or judgment of the things that come our way. It just knows. The problem is that most of us are run by the other side, which is the false ego. And the false ego judges everything. It doesn't like change. It is fearful. It's the thing that spins things over and worry in our mind. It's usually that voice that we all have with the negative self-talk, all right? So the first thing that I want people to realize is that the false ego judges. It judges everything, even the quote-unquote good things, but it judges them. It'll put a judgment on it. This is good, this is bad. This is yellow, this is green. It'll decide for you what is good and what it likes. Now, this is important to understand, because when your false ego is perceiving something as bad, like self-sabotage, you're stuck in the self-judgment. You can't get out of it because you've decided, your false ego has decided, not the true you, but your false ego has decided this self-sabotage is bad. So it's really important to recognize that the judging does not come from our true selves. Okay? It comes from the false ego. So anytime you hear that voice in your head, and we all have it, and we'll never get rid of it, but we can learn to shrink it, and we can learn to quiet it. But anytime we hear it, you have to recognize that that's the false ego. Okay? So the false ego judges everything. It even judges emotions. Remember last time when we were going through that exercise of how to process an emotion and let it go? And you were speaking for the listeners and the viewers and saying, "Oh, but Wendy, nobody's going to want to do that." Remember when I was asking people to feel the feeling fully?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, why don't we want to do that? Because our false ego judges certain feelings like anger, fear, sadness as bad, right? So that's why we resist them. That's why we suppress them, because the false ego has decided they're bad. But if we go back to what we talked about last week, we learn to say, okay, we don't like them, but we can still use them as an amazing tool, right? We can go into them fully and let them go. So in that sense, are they really bad? Maybe not, because they gave us insight into something we didn't necessarily know beforehand, right? We learned last time, well, what if that sadness that we judge as bad gives us insight into a part of ourselves that we didn't previously know? If we suppress the sadness, we'll never learn that thing. But if we feel it fully, then all sorts of interesting things come out. We learn all sorts of interesting things about ourselves and what's affecting us. And that's how we grow as individuals. That's how we evolve our consciousness, isn't it? And in the case of emotional eating, it means that when you can let go of those emotions and they're not stuck inside of you, you're not eating in a misguided attempt to suppress or handle an emotion. Make sense?
Absolutely. So the correlation between ego and eating.
Yes. Yes.
Can you? So you mentioned about false ego. When is a good ego a good thing for emotional eating?
Well, remember I said we're split. We have the true ego and the false ego. See, most people just use the term ego, and most people think that, oh, as soon as we say ego, that's bad. But the true self is really not bad. It's just who you are. There's no judgment on it, right? And so the false ego is the one that's dangerous. The false ego is the one that we have to watch out for. The true self, the one that is just, hey, I'm here, I have a sense of myself as an individual as completely separate from you or anyone else, that's perfectly fine. And again, I'm not even really saying the false ego is bad so much. I'm saying learn to recognize it, because it's the one that steers us in a direction that we don't necessarily want to go into. Okay? So a couple other points about, did that answer that?
You got it.
Okay, good. Because I want to make a couple of other points about the false ego as well. There's so much there, and we're not going to spend the whole time talking about the false ego, but it's an important setup to really learning to understand the self-sabotage. Another element about the false ego is that it cares what other people think. Right? This is a huge one. I think there are very few of us that can honestly, truly say that we never care what anyone else thinks. I know I've done a lot of work on that myself, and I don't care as much about what other people think as I used to, but if I'm being completely truthful with everyone listening, it still creeps up. It still comes up. Oh, do I look okay? Oh, what am I wearing? This kind of thing. That's false ego. So most of us, all of us, I think, in some parts of our lives, care what other people think. When it comes to weight, we do this. We walk into a room and we survey the other people, consciously or subconsciously, and say things like, oh, I'm the heaviest in the room. Or look at her, isn't she so skinny? Right? or a less often spoken, but one that I've discovered in working with clients is, when people start to think about really making a change when it comes to their eating and their health, they actually have the thought that they're going to be judged by the people closest to them. That, they'll say things to me like, well, everyone in my family is big. We're a big family. We enjoy food. We eat food at all of our events. It's a big part of our culture. My parents are Bayesian. In the West Indian culture, food is a big part of celebration, and pretty much in every culture, food is a big part of celebration. And that's okay, nothing wrong with that. But when we identify with it to the point where we will sacrifice our own health and what our true self wants because of what others might think if we pass up on a second piece of pie, then that's the false ego at play.
So you mentioned something interesting there in regards to culture and
Yeah.
eating habits.
Yeah.
Because a lot of cultures and many cultures, eating is a big thing. Obviously, celebrating, eating, etc. How tough is it for some of us emotionally to not follow the culture and break away from the culture and look after ourselves when it comes to our food intake?
It's huge. It's really tough. That's why I wanted to mention this point, that when we care about what others think, that often comes from our cultural upbringing. And I want people to understand that that's a false ego construct. That caring about what they think of us is coming from our false ego, not our true self. Our true self always wants what's best for ourselves. And that is not in a selfish way, right? Because if we love ourselves fully and we live in our truth, we're actually going to provide more love to everyone around us, because what happens is that we give them the okay, the permission, we show them the example of being able to live in their truth. So that cultural impact is huge on people, and it's huge in the Black community. You know, people will say, oh, well, we're just a bigger people. Well, I don't know about that. I think the facts are, we talked about that in the first session, in that recent CDC study, the obesity rates in the African American community in the States are 49.5% compared to only 34% in the white community. So it's true, it's a fact that we are a bigger people. But does that have to be part of our cultural definition? I say no. I say that at the end of the day, we each as individuals need to be living in our truth, our true self, and make decisions as to what's healthy for us as individuals, what's healthy. No judgment on looks or who's skinny or that kind of thing. It's not about how we look. It's about what's healthy.
Right. Absolutely. That's so true. And I know, coming from the culture I do, food is a big thing.
Yeah.
It's a very big thing. And if the pressure is on, when you're not eating, they say, what's wrong with you?
Exactly. The pressure is on. And the host or whoever cooked for you might even be insulted that you're not eating their food, right?
Absolutely.
What? I cooked for you, I prepared this beautiful meal, and that's all you're having?
Yeah.
What? You're only having a little bit of dessert, but I made your favorite.
Exactly.
And then there's this cultural pressure, and this is where we get caught up in not loving ourselves first and feeling this pressure, the cultural pressure. Well, that's what we all do at Christmas, or that's what we all do at Thanksgiving, or whatever the occasion, or Sunday dinner, whatever it is. And there's a way to enjoy those things, but still take care of ourselves. We can do both, right? We don't have to totally reject all of those wonderful cultural traditions, but we also don't have to let them influence us to the point where our false ego is in complete control, and now we're not giving ourselves the love we need because our true self wants to get healthier.
Right on. So what's your next point? Because I know you laid a very good foundation there in regards to the false ego. Progress onward and take us along your journey on how you want to look into this subject this evening. Sure.
The other point that I want to make about this false ego is that it resists change. And we touched on that because you asked me the question about the cultural environment. But the resisting change, that's also the false ego. False ego does not like change. It wants to keep you small. It wants to keep you the way you've always been. And it does not want you to evolve your consciousness or to grow. This is another important element because, again, a lot of people will say, well, I don't know who I'm going to be when I lose the weight. And that scares me because I know who I am now. I know how to operate in this environment, in this body, in this mindset. If I change that mindset, I don't know what that's going to mean for me. And so there's this fear, right? Even when our true self, again, knows that it's good for us and that it's going to help us, our false ego is saying, nah, I don't want to change. I had a woman say to me once that she really wanted to lose weight, but she was afraid that she would actually lose her power. because she knew that as a big woman, when she walked into a room, she garnered a lot of attention. You know, she wasn't invisible. Everyone would notice her, and she started to use her size as power. And she actually said that to me, you know, and this was after she lost weight, but she said that one of the reasons she was resisting it so much was that she was afraid she would lose that power that came with sort of wielding her size, so to speak. And I thought that was really interesting.
You know, something just popped up in my mind in regards to the whole losing weight issue. Do, in general, the clients you have, male versus female, do men approach it differently than women?
Yes. You know, if you look, for example, on my What's Eating You page on Facebook, there's many, many, many more female followers than men. I think that women do approach it differently. And I think we touched on this in an earlier conversation. I can't remember if it was the first week or the second week. How it happens scientifically underneath is the same for men and women, but I think that, yes, men and women do tend to approach it differently. You know, we all have the stereotypical picture of the female who's dealing with something, sitting in front of the TV in a bathrobe eating ice cream, right? To resolve some emotional issue, a breakup or something like that. But we don't necessarily get that stereotypical image in our mind for men, do we? So men tend to not be as open with how and why they're eating. My men clients will say things like, this is the classic line I hear from men more often, I just got to get to the gym. You know, I'm not as active as I used to be. And so the women tend to be more conscious of the fact that, yeah, I eat emotionally. Once men open up to the idea that they're eating emotionally, the process is the same as to how to resolve the issue. But they do tend to focus more on getting more active, at least this is what I've noticed, getting more active and looking for other reasons behind their eating aside from the emotional element. Is that your experience with friends or people that you know that are men?
Yeah. What most guys that I know, when there's a weight issue, their first thought is the gym. Not, is it something about me? Like,
Yeah.
is it something other than my weight? Is there something inside of me that's causing this weight challenge?
Yes. Yeah. So you've seen the same thing. That's a nice confirmation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Absolutely.
tend to look a little bit outside toward physical activity first.
True. And it's interesting because a lot of trainers will say it's important to have a good core, which they mean the core of the body here, but also should be a core of the mind too.
Ah, that's a brilliant insight. Exactly. Right? What does core really mean?
You know, the core, not only core physical, but core emotional.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
Continue on with what you're wanting to share with us then tonight.
Sure. So just to wrap up a bit on the false ego, I really want everyone to get clear on the fact that the false ego is not really you, but that for most of us, it is running our lives. It really is. And when you start to listen, even just those three examples I used of judgment, of caring what other people think, and resisting change, if you start to really look at your life, say over the course of a week, and look at all the situations you're in and ask yourself, in those three situations, did that thought come into your mind? You know, again, just with yourself, so nobody's judging. You will see how often and how much the false ego is in charge. From the little decisions, like, you know, what am I going to wear today, to the big decisions like, what's my career choice going to be? You know, if your parents always told you that anything that isn't a professional designation doesn't count, and so you decide you're only going to get some sort of professional designation because you don't think any other kind of work is valuable, it's your false ego. It's your parents' false ego, right? So
Yes.
It can be huge. This false ego is really at the root of all of this, okay?
Excellent.
Okay, so now, getting to the self-sabotage piece. Why did I spend so much time talking about the false ego? Because it's important to understand those elements and how we are split, and how it's the false ego that is judging this thing that we call self-sabotage. Okay? So where we want to get to is, okay, recognizing, yeah, I ate all, well all week, and then the weekend came, and now, I've decided that I've eaten poorly all weekend, and here I am in my false ego Sunday night saying, oh, I sabotaged my week. I was doing so well, and I sabotaged myself. What do we do with that? Instead of just feeling bad, we really want to follow the breadcrumbs, so to speak. Pun intended, right? We're talking about food. Follow the breadcrumbs. Remember what we talked about last week when we said, ask yourself the question, what's eating you? What's going on? What happened before the quote-unquote self-sabotage started? As I said, for me, my pattern was a hard week of work, feeling like my week was all work and no fun, no pleasure. And so using that food as a reward of sorts for a week of hard work, right? So what unprocessed emotions might I have had around those weeks? Oh, do I really like my job? Was I frustrated with not getting somewhere on a goal I had? Whatever it is. We go back to the things we discussed last week, use that self-sabotage as a tool to say what emotions are going on, feeling them fully and letting them go. Okay, so that's the first piece of how we can use that self-sabotage. The second piece is to then ask, well, what are the triggers? I touched on that. For me, the trigger was often just feeling like I hadn't had enough fun. That my work was so much work because I didn't necessarily enjoy my work at that time in my career, right? I've had jobs that I didn't necessarily enjoy. And so it felt like purgatory, so to speak. It felt like nothing but work, as opposed to a joyful experience where I was contributing and feeling like I was doing something meaningful. So that Friday night became a trigger. Well, now that I know that, if I'm feeling like I've worked really hard for an extended period of time or been doing things I don't really enjoy, as soon as that trigger goes off in my mind, oh, I should have a chocolate bar or something, I can recognize that trigger and say, well, maybe not. Maybe I don't really need that. Oh, that's that old false ego pattern, Wendy. You don't need to go there.
Exactly.
Yeah. But it takes some practice, right, to become aware of that.
Absolutely.
And when you pay attention, go ahead.
Absolutely, you're so right. You don't have to be perfect all the time. You have to be perfect at the right time.
Exactly. And so now we're using our self-sabotage, aren't we? We're using it to learn something about ourselves. When we hear ourselves saying, oh, I sabotaged myself again, we go through this process and say, okay, well, what was it about? What was it about? The other thing to look at with these incidences of self-sabotage is to ask yourself, and we touched on some of this, is it a habit that I've developed for whatever reason? With a lot of people, it's the opposite. They eat better on the weekend, but they eat poorly during the week because they're at work. And they say they don't have time to cook. I don't have time, Wendy. I don't have time to make my lunch, so I go to the food court. And what's in the food court? 99% junk food, right? So
absolutely, yes. I try as much as possible to bring a lunch from home.
Yeah. And don't you usually eat better when you bring a lunch from home?
Well, not only do you eat better, but it saves a lot of money.
I know. So much less expensive. I know. Double benefit.
Absolutely.
Right? But for some people, this self-sabotage is a habit because they haven't stopped to say, well, how can I get out of that habit? For example, one thing that my husband and I started doing years ago, or I should confess and say my husband because he really does all the cooking.
Oh!
I gotta be truthful here.
That's all right. No problem. We need to get him on and do some cooking shows. So keep on going. But that's good. That's good.
Yeah, he does all the cooking. But it's the idea of batch cooking and planning to make extra things for your lunch. So now we've taken a habit that caused self-sabotage and turned it into a habit that supports our health goals. For example, cooking a batch of 20 drumsticks. You can get those big packs of drumsticks in the store. It's really easy when you're cooking Sunday dinner, if you're cooking some chicken, to cook a whole batch of pieces that you can leave in the fridge and eat over the next few days in your lunch. You throw a couple drumsticks into your lunch and warm them up at work.
Well,
and have a salad or some rice with that, right?
You know what? I'm loving your husband, because I got to self-confess, I do most of the cooking at the house here, and I fully agree with what you're saying around batch cooking. Like, one of the things I like to do is buy a whole chicken.
Yeah.
And you can use it for a period of time instead of buying separate pieces. It's usually cheaper to buy a whole chicken and get more use out of it than buying the individual parts per se.
Yes. Exactly.
So batch cooking, I fully approve of that.
Yeah. And so that's a habit, right? We can take the self-sabotage now and say, what habit's going on here? And then change that into a healthy habit like batch cooking. But you might never thought of it if I didn't ask you to use your self-sabotage to your benefit. So this is how we're using something that we might be previously judging as negative to say, okay, well, I know I'm doing it. What's it about? What can I do about it? And the other piece there, we touched on it, is often just a habit that's been imprinted from childhood.
True.
In our house, we were rewarded with food.
Absolutely.
Right? We weren't given allowances, money for helping out. But my dad used to reward us with food. So we'd say, oh, okay, we work in the garden now, let's go to Kentucky. We'd have fried chicken or
KFC. Wow.
Yeah, or donuts.
I can't even remember the last time I had Kentucky Fried Chicken. Wow. Wow, like I can't remember because I like to cook my own chicken.
Well, you probably do a better job.
Thank you, and I'm sure your husband does an outstanding job cooking chicken also.
Yeah, but you see, those cultural habits, when we've grown up being rewarded like that with food, that can really feed that self-sabotage because it's just part of our state of mind. And it's only when we stop, look at the self-sabotage, and ask these questions. Okay, is this out of habit? Is this a cultural thing that I'm doing? What's going on here? But now we can use that self-sabotage to our benefit. So you see how by understanding the false ego, by really asking the questions, once we notice that self-sabotage pattern, how now we're actually using the self-sabotage to help us lose weight. Why? Because we're asking ourselves the questions as to what's going on emotionally.
Wendy, you've made self-sabotage sound so good.
Well, it's not that I'm encouraging everyone to go out there and sabotage themselves, but this is the hope that I hope will help people. People need hope because when they come in and they say I sabotage myself, they feel hopeless. They don't know why. They just recognize the pattern. They want to do something about it, but they've got no tools to do something about it. But this is an example of a set of tools that they can use to deal with it. And I actually have a little phrase I'd like to share with people, and when they're listening to the recording, they can rewind and write it down. A little tool that they can use when they catch themselves self-sabotaging. Okay? And the reason is, the backdrop to this is, and I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers have heard this, you've probably heard it, but it's the idea that what you resist persists. Have you heard that expression before? It's not mine. I didn't make it up.
I have heard it.
Yeah, what you resist persists. Well, when people just say, oh, well, I self-sabotage myself, what's going to happen? I don't like that self-sabotage. I beat myself up for the self-sabotage. That's a resistance, right?
True.
It's not accepting it. It's a resistance. So when you resist it, it persists. So the phrase that I want everyone to try to do, and I know it's going to sound crazy, but the phrase that I want everyone to try to say out loud to themselves the next time they find themselves sabotaging themselves, or their false ego has concluded they've sabotaged themselves, is to say this: even though I sabotaged my eating plan, I love and accept myself, my body, and my personality, and the fact that I sabotaged my eating plan.
Very subtle, but very powerful.
Yeah. So what we're doing here is we're bypassing that resistance. I'm trying to get people to say, okay, stop resisting, stop the self-hate, right? Beating yourselves up, the judging, the false ego stuff, and accept that the sabotage happened.
Right.
And when we start from that place of acceptance and self-love and say, okay, it happened. There you go. No big deal. When we start from that place, now we can go back to the exercises I talked about earlier. We can say, okay, what was going on? What were the triggers? What are the habits? We can look more objectively at all of that because, we've stopped the judgment. We're starting from a place of self-love and acceptance.
Excellent.
Does that make some sense to do that?
Absolutely. That's fair. That's more than fair. It's a very good take home for the conversation and for everyone who's watching or listening to this, whether live or at another date. What else is on your plate that you'd wanted to share with us this evening?
Well, I know we're at about 40 minutes here. So, really just to remind people that when you're using these tools, when you're taking something that your false ego judges as negative, you got to remember that. It's your false ego judging it as negative. Really dig into these tools, rewind these recordings and say, okay, what can I do with that? I realize I don't like it. I, meaning the false ego I, because the true self doesn't like or dislike. It just knows. It just knows truth. That's all. And take it through those steps. And that last statement when I said, even though I sabotage my eating, I love myself, there's going to be times when you're saying that, and you're actually going to hear your false ego in your mind at the same time saying, no, I don't. I don't love the fact that I sabotage myself. It's okay. Allow that chatter. Allow that mind chatter. Okay? It's like anything else. It's like training for a marathon. The first day is going to hurt like heck. You're going to have sore muscles. You're going to be exhausted. And by the 30th day, 15 minutes into that run, you're going to be saying, wow, I am cruising.
Excellent.
15 minutes in, and I'm just getting warmed up. It's the same thing.
It's so true, and I piggyback on what you're sharing with us because one of my favorite sayings from someone else is, where the mind goes, the person follows.
Yes. Wonderful. Wonderful. And isn't that what we're trying to do here? Take the mind there first, right?
Excellent. Well, Miss Wendy, this is our 3 of 3, but you're coming back for more.
Absolutely, anytime.
Well, I already have topics in my head or conversation pieces I'd like you to speak about that have come to my mind, and we'll certainly discuss off air because I want you back on next month already.
Okay.
Give you a little break from me because you've had me for like 3 weeks in a row. Give you a little break, but I already have one or two conversation pieces that I'd like you to address in the upcoming weeks. So I'd like to say first things first. Thanks so much for sharing over the last few weeks with us. I've really enjoyed it. The audience has enjoyed it. How can people get in contact with you?
Oh, they can find me on Twitter at What's Eating You. Remember, the U is spelled with just the letter U, so What's Eating just the letter U. They can find me on Facebook by searching for my name, Wendy Knight-Agard, or just putting What's Eating You in the search bar, and you'll find the What's Eating You page. Lots of great info there. They can also find me by going to WendyKnight-Agard.show.com, and they can find my podcast. And they can go to whatseatingyou.com for free videos on emotional eating. And of course, I've got to mention that I'm so thankful to you, Dr. Vibe, for having me on to talk about emotional eating. And they can also go to our URL. It's kind of long. I'm going to read it. I know you're going to put it in the text follow-up that people can go to if they need help with emotional eating. They can buy an 8-week course to help them eliminate emotional eating. And if they go to this special link, they'll be supporting Dr. Vibe as well. And we have a special price of $197 for that 8-week course. And that's at whatseatingyou.com/programs/mind-secrets Dr. Vibe. So anyone who wants more help, feel free to go there and enjoy the content.
And now, just with you sharing in the last 45 seconds, I already have another conversation piece I want you to bring to the table already.
You're full of ideas.
Well, you know, everyone's creating things, and I'd just like them to share, because a lot of times people just create things or come up with things, and they don't realize how impactful and powerful it is. They just think, oh, just another thing, but to many others, it can make different positive differences in their life.
So true, so true.
So it's the little things that make or break the vine, not the big things. It's the little things.
I agree.
So thank you so much for sharing. All the best to you and your family. I now definitely, when I'm on my way to Montreal, I have to stop by and get some Knight-Agard cooking from the man of the home. Because now I'm going to book a reservation.
Okay. I'll tell him you're coming for dinner.
Yes, Knight-Agard, and I'm gonna. Then maybe we'll do a live session and say, "Here's Wendy's husband, the man, the cook of the house.
The cook of the house.
The man knows how to rock and roll." Also, absolutely, for people who are watching this live, happy Martin Luther King Day, and always celebrate the dream of Martin Luther King, whatever race or whatever color you are. Don't just celebrate it today. Celebrate it every day. So just want to leave with that thought. It's Dr. Vibe here, the host of the Dr. Vibe Show, saying you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles and you're a solution for someone's problem. Also, I'm the host of the monthly Google Hangouts for premium members at the Good Men Project, which is one of the most viewed men's websites in the world, averaging 2.5 to 3 million page views a week. Also, there's some new stuff that I'm going to be doing with the Good Men Project in the very near future. Can't say it yet, but that's another good feature coming up in the near future. So, as always, we'd like to say, God bless, peace be well, and keep the faith, and good night.